All right, all. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate it. So this is going to be the first, and hopefully not the first, but one of the starting mini-series of the Boston meetups for Apache Iceberg. My name's Andy. I'm a senior engineer here at Akamai, and this is Alex.
Hey, everybody. My name is Alex Merced. I'm a head of DevRel over there at Dremio. And it's exciting to actually have a Apache Iceberg event here in Boston. I want to thank Andy and Akamai so much for being a great partner in organizing this event. We all love open source, and having these events all across the country is a great way to celebrate open source and help open source continue to grow and build the community that allows us to exchange the ideas, the practices, that allows us to use Apache Iceberg better and better. Now, for those who don't know who I am, let's get those introductions out of the way. Okay, again, I'm head of DevRel at Dremio. Basically, I spent the last 3 years of my life waking up and thinking about Iceberg, going to sleep, having nightmares, sometimes dreams about Apache Iceberg, and then waking up and doing it again. I got to be one of the co-authors on I work for Dremio, which is the Intelligent Lakehouse platform. Oops, let me go back. No, there we go. The Intelligent Lakehouse platform. Essentially, we've been on Iceberg fairly early on, and have been big advocates for Iceberg and building a platform around Iceberg. And I got to be one of the co-authors on Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide, basically the O'Reilly book on Apache Iceberg, which if you want a free copy, you can scan this QR code and get a free copy. Although there's a little screen there. So, but if you want to get the link, if you just head over to any of my blogs, you'll find the link pretty quickly. So just look up Alex Merced Iceberg blog, and you will find that link pretty quickly. I'm also working on 2 new book projects, one for Apache Polaris, so the definitive guide for Apache Polaris, which will be another O'Reilly book. We just released the early release, so the first 3 chapters have been released. You can download that for free. I'll be posting the link to that in the next couple of days. So if you don't already follow me on LinkedIn, do so. And that way, when I share the link where you can get that for free, you'll be able to get that. And then I'm working on one other book with Manning called Architecting an Iceberg Lakehouse, which is what today's presentation is kind of based on. It's like, there's more detail in the book. But that will be on the Manning platform in the next couple months, the first few chapters. And then that will release February next year. The Polaris book will release fully, I think, November this year. So I have no life. This is what I do. Okay, so that's who I am. Now, the goal of this presentation, Architecting an Apache Iceberg Lakehouse, the idea is probably a lot of us are pretty familiar with Iceberg at this point. What I want to do is kind of go through the stage, like what happens if you are a data architecting sort of a new platform for and you want to build it around Apache Iceberg. Okay, so I'm going to just talk about the high level of how you should think about it as a data architect. Now, in the presentations afterwards, you're going to hear how Andy's actually architected a platform with Apache Iceberg. In the same story, so you hear about Akamai's story and Grubhub's story regarding like their Apache Iceberg platforms. So if I haven't mentioned it already, Iceberg. Okay, these are the jokes. Oh, Wednesday. Okay, now a little. Why did I say that? Quick story. Like whenever you're doing like public speaking, I've been doing a lot of public speaking for the last 15 years of my life. One thing I've learned is that when you're in front of an audience and like you want to break up the like cut the ice or yeah, I guess cut the ice. I don't know. What you do is you just say the day of the week. Like I just go Wednesday. It doesn't matter what day it is. If I go Sunday, Monday. People always had like a bad Monday or a bad Sunday that they can relate to. So when they hear you say that, they just kind of smile like, yeah, I've had that day. Okay? And it just breaks the tension. Nice, right up. So pro tip for anyone if you're doing public speaking at some point. But, okay, so why a lakehouse? Bottom line, we know why we want a lakehouse. Bottom line is that we like data lakes because data lakes allow us to basically use whatever tool we want. The problem is that it didn't have the kind of abstractions that we like in data warehouses. In data warehouses, I could run queries really fast. And I didn't think about files. I didn't think about CSV. I didn't think about JSON. I didn't think about Parquet. I thought sales table. I thought orders table. And I ran SQL queries. And it was very nice and very fast, very easy. On a data lake, now I have to sit there and say, okay, hey, I want these 100 files or this directory of files that are partitioned this way. And it just becomes a lot more cumbersome. And then when I want to update that, like, hey, I need to add a column to this data set. Oh, guess what? Now I got to rewrite the whole data set. Like there's all these sort of tensions and sort of imperfections in that world. So basically, what if we could take those 2 worlds and merge them into one? Give you the flexibility, the more affordability, the more direct access to your data via a data lake, but give you that sort of database, data warehouse-like feel. And that's sort of basically the story of the Lakehouse. Okay, basically, when you use a table format like Apache Iceberg, now suddenly you're not working with a folder of Parquet files, you're working with the sales table. You're working with the orders table again, and you can run SQL and all things that we liked about our traditional data warehouse systems, except if I wanted to use 10 different tools, I didn't need to make 10 different copies of the data. All my tools can speak to the one copy of the data, which makes life quite a bit easier. Okay? And again, we get a nice other benefits like separation of compute and storage. So basically, hey, I can scale my storage separately than my compute. And a lot of times, if I'm not running any queries at all, because all Apache Iceberg tables are just Parquet files and metadata files stored on your storage, I can be running no compute at all. Okay? Or other really nice benefit. Okay? And again, you get all that stuff without duplication, lower costs. So in that case, it seems pretty advantageous to have a data lakehouse. Think of it like the freedom of the data lake with the muscle of a warehouse. And no vendor lock-in. But the problem is, like, a lot of people are like, yeah, I really like this idea of a data lakehouse. And what they do is they just immediately start trying to implement things right away without thinking about, hey, where are they now versus where do they need to be? So people just start grabbing the coolest, the shiniest things they hear. Like, okay, I heard that this tool is really cool with Iceberg, and I'm going to go use that. Or I'm going to go use this tool. Without taking the time to properly assess sort of what are the needs of their company or their organization where they're at now. So what you want to do is before you implement anything is do a pre-architecture audit. Okay? Take a moment and actually ask the questions to understand what are the needs of the organization. Okay? Where are you now? Okay? And then who are the people who care? If you're talking about, you might want to talk to compliance people who have to deal with like the legalities of things. You're going to want to talk to data analysts who have to consume the data. You want to talk to the data engineers who have to ingest the data. You want to go talk to the business line people who have to kind of understand the business requirements and business values that they're looking for. Because one thing is to create like a super fast platform, but did you need that? Okay, like was that could have it been 20% less fast and 20% cheaper and still delivered the business value that you were seeking? So having these conversations and figuring out things like, hey, where am I at now? Am I on cloud? Am I on-prem? Am I on both currently? Do I want that to be what I am? Okay, what are our latency needs? Like, do I really need to build a sub-millisecond latency, or is 5-minute latency good enough? Or, are we looking really just to update this data set once a week? Like, what is it that we need to achieve the business value that my stakeholders actually need? Okay, because always cool to know that something is possible and you can do it. The question is, do you need to do it? Okay, it's not about could, it's about should. Okay, so again, figuring out, hey, which are the data sets that are most valuable to move? Okay, so hey, there's these benefits that I get from Apache Iceberg as far as making the data set more accessible, etc. Which are the data sets that I really could benefit from that first? Because I'm not going to migrate everything overnight. So I have to kind of think about how am I going to phase these things in? So again, I'm just kind of getting this feedback from my stakeholders to start being able to design such a plan. Okay, which data sets are costing us the most? Okay, do I have a data set that we're doing a lot of transformations in the data warehouse via DBT? So we're doing a lot of maybe too much ELT in the data warehouse and it's costing us a lot of money and then it's also being queried a lot. Maybe that data set would be a nice first data set to go move over with Iceberg so that way we can reduce some of those costs. Again, it's just kind of assessing sort of where you're at to help architect sort of where is it you want to go first. And then I have all these tools currently. Do I need all those tools? After we move to Iceberg, are all those tools still going to be necessary? And which are the ones that we can't live without? And start kind of thinking of, and then do they work with Iceberg? And if not, what would be the replacement, or what would be the way you would kind of interface that or adapt to that? Okay, not every platform is going to go away. Some still have needs, and you want to kind of know that going in. Okay, and then basically, again, we already talked about what are our SLAs. So like, hey, what's going to be your latency? Which tools are not negotiable? So you want to establish these rules. The way we think about it is you're trying to establish requirements, saying, hey, whatever, I'm going to go out and I have to go figure out, hey, what my storage is and what my ingestion tool is going to be, what my catalog is going to be. And that's going to involve you to access different OSS tools. That's going to involve talking to different vendors. And everyone's going to tell you, our toy is the best toy in the world. Okay, we have the best Iceberg toy in the world. And every toy is pretty cool, but is it the toy you need? So having a clear set of requirements will let you kind of cut through the marketing fluff and be able to say, okay, does it do the things that I've already established that I need before people tell you, well, this is what I think you should need, and why our thing is the best for that thing we think you should need. Okay, so again, it's all about asking these questions and establishing these requirements. Okay, again, we've already kind of established this, kind of asking, where is your data at now? Okay, now once you've kind of done this pre-architecture audit, so again, the step is interview your stakeholders, figure out who are the people who are going to benefit or value or need to use this data platform, have the interviews with them, get a clear picture of where you're at, and then from that, establish a list of, hey, this is what my platform needs to be able to do to establish the business value that I need. Then I can start shopping around for the things, all of my little basket of pieces that I need to assemble my lakehouse. Because all at the end of the day, a lakehouse is just a modular warehouse. It's just a data warehouse. Just instead of you buying a box that's a data warehouse, you're buying the pieces and assembling it yourself. Okay, it's like Build-A-Bear, except data. Okay. So what are the core pieces that I need to assemble to really build that lakehouse? Okay, I'm going to need a storage layer, because I got to store those Parquet files, those JSON files, those Avro files somewhere. Okay, I'm going to need a catalog, because somehow I'm going to need to, one, track which tables are available, and two, govern those tables. I mean, I could theoretically probably do some governing at the engine level and do some governing of the file system, but that's not going to capture every access pattern. Ideal world, you have a catalog, and everyone accesses those tables through the catalog, and that becomes, no matter whether they're using Dremio, whether they're using Trino, whether they're using Spark, Snowflake, if they all go through that one catalog, then everyone's access control will be equal regardless of what tool you need. So it becomes a real big piece when it comes to governance. Ingestion, you need some sort of tool to actually bring the data to Iceberg, so you need something that's going to write your data to Iceberg, whether you're writing in streaming data or batch data, etc. You're going to need you're probably going to want some integration or federation tool, okay? Why? Because your data is not going to be in Iceberg 100% from day one. You're going to have some legacy systems, whether they are old school databases, data warehouses. So initially, you're going to need to have some sort of federation capabilities up front, and probably for the foreseeable future, because probably not 100% of your data is going to be in Iceberg. So you're going to want some sort of tool that allows you to kind of federate queries across different places, okay? And then consumption. At the end of the day, you're going to need tools that allow you to build your BI dashboards or be able to do your AI ML training, et cetera. Basically, things that allow you to actually consume the data. Mostly probably what you've already been using. Okay, but basically once you have all these pieces in place, there's your platform. Okay, and you'll see Andy's presentation is a really great diagram of exactly this. So like all these pieces kind of all nice and wired together. So when you think about storage, again, we think about where you're going to store the data. Are you going to put it in the cloud? Looking at things like S3, ADLS, GCS. Okay, we love cloud because it scales automatically, you have high durability. This is overall going to be a simpler thing. Generally, most of the time you see people using the cloud. Okay, but what's one of the big problems with the cloud? Egress. Okay, especially if you have multi-cloud environments, because maybe, hey, one scenario I've seen a couple of times is that company A gets acquired by company B. The company A was technically using like Azure, but company B is using AWS, and now you have data in like 2 different locations, and trying to decide, hey, where you're going to move it to, and so now you're doing all this joining of the data across environments, creating a lot of egress costs. Okay, so it happens. Okay, on-premise storage, great full control, quick low latency because everything's kind of physically very nice and close to each other. Okay, great for regulated industries that have like certain security requirements. Well, it's a lot of work. You have to manage. You have to manage all that. You have to buy a lot of hardware. Not always the easiest thing for a lot of people. And there's hybrid situations where you want the flexibility of the cloud for certain data sets, but you still, for regulatory purposes and security purposes, may still want the rigidity of having an on-prem storage as well. And that's becoming more and more of a thing. Okay, so you may want to go a hybrid route again, depending on your requirements. Okay. Okay, that's the same slide twice. Cool, then there's catalog. Now again, at the end of the day, Iceberg metadata is very important. Now luckily, all the Iceberg metadata is just files in your storage. So it's like our metadata files that track like the partitioning of the table, the schema of the table, the different snapshots of the table. But the problem is, an engine, every time you update an Iceberg table, you create a new metadata file. So if I'm an engine, how do I know which metadata file is the right one to read? Well, I need something to kind of tell, hey, this is the most recent, this is the newest metadata file, and that's generally going to be the role of the catalog, okay? That's going to help track all these metadata files and make sure that we have consistent definitions of the data across tools. So that way Spark isn't using a different metadata file than Dremio or Flink or Trino or whatever. So in that case, catalogs are important for consistency and for governance. Okay, but one of the most important things in the world of Iceberg catalogs nowadays is the REST catalog spec. Okay, before, okay, if anyone remembers like a couple of years ago, you wanted to use an Iceberg catalog, certain Iceberg catalogs work with certain tools. So you could, basically by choosing a particular Iceberg catalog, you might be locking yourself out of certain tools in the future, or certain options, or certain platforms and whatnot, because everyone had to kind of create their own integrations. Like everyone had a Spark integration, of course, but how about your favorite like managed platform? Like, hey, does Fivetran allow you to ingest into that particular catalog or something like that? But now with the Iceberg REST catalog, every tool only has to really create one connector essentially to this REST catalog specification, which means that any catalog that uses REST spec, which is pretty much every catalog nowadays, can use every tool. Okay, so basically, my emphasis when I get to this point is, if anything else, just make sure that whatever catalog you choose implements the REST spec, which means ideally not Hive or JDBC catalog. Pretty much everything else uses REST spec. So I think I have a list in the next slide. Well, still talking about here. So here I'm just talking about the benefit of the REST spec. Okay, so again, with the REST spec, you now have access to all the tools. So you get the true promise of Iceberg, because again, that promise of Iceberg, the idea was to have one copy of the data that would work with all my tools. But if the catalog is the point of access, and the catalog doesn't work with all my tools, doesn't matter if every tool reads Iceberg, if they don't access my catalog, the REST spec fixed that. So now truly, all my tools can talk to all my tables really nicely, okay? Which gives me the ability to work, and then that allows me to work across platforms, and it gives me the flexibility. So actually, if whatever catalog I'm using right now doesn't scale to my needs in the future, I can always switch over to another one, and I don't really have to change any of my workflows, because you're just using the same types of connections, just very plug and play. Ingestion, okay? Comes down to one, how frequently you need to ingest. Like, do I need to do batch ingestion and do a periodic ingestion, or am I doing streaming ingestion? Okay, so then that's going to determine sort of what tools I want to use. So like if I'm doing batch, there's a huge variety of tools I could use, but if I'm doing streaming, then maybe I'm probably going to have some data in Kafka, and then I need to kind of handle that data, which I might do with either Flink or Kafka Connect to actually land it into an Iceberg table. And then the question is, do I want to use, I could self-manage my own OSS tools, which is fine, but then I got to put up the infrastructure, the cost of the compute, which may make sense depending on sort of different considerations. You know, like, hey, you know, do I have the people who understand how to do that, okay, on my staff already? Does it make sense? Or do I want to go with like a managed solution? Do I want to go use Confluent or Red Panda to go handle that part for me? Okay, so these basically, again, one of the things at this point, I'm thinking oftentimes self-managed versus managed, and batch versus streaming. And again, it's not one the right answer. Different workflows, different data sets might have different requirements. Okay, and here we're just kind of reiterating that again. Cool. And then integration, which you can also think of as the federation layer. The idea is like, hey, what is the layer that brings everything together, takes all of my Iceberg data, and makes it work with all my non-Iceberg data. Okay, and there's different tools for that. So first I would say like there's two sort of main engines that allow you to federate queries, and that's going to be Dremio and Trino. Okay, so Trino, open source, large connector library in the open source field. So if you want to go the self-managed route, that's an option. Dremio has a self-managed route called Dremio Community Edition. But the big difference I would say is that you've ever heard of a project called Apache Arrow? Apache Arrow was technically created in the early days of Dremio as Dremio's in-memory format, and evolved into Apache Arrow. Whew, you can tell I've done a lot of presentations today. But Apache Arrow, so basically, which is now what's become like the standard, right, for like in-memory representation. Like now you start seeing it everywhere. You're starting to see like, what is it? You see like Data Fusion, the engine that is built on Rust with Apache Arrow. There's Data Fusion comment where they're trying to replace the guts of Spark with Data Fusion, so that way it becomes Apache Arrow based. It's really become a part of a lot of things. So, and then Arrow doesn't just handle that, but it's also like Arrow Flight, the transport protocol. It's really, really, really cool stuff. But just again, stating as to sort of who Dremio is there. Okay, but whether you're using Dremio or Trino, At the end of the day, you might, basically you're going to want to run different sort of create certain views and create your semantic layer on top of that. And a tool like dbt can allow you to kind of orchestrate SQL to create like all of your views and materialized views on top of whatever federation tool you're using. Okay, and then nowadays you have another option in SQL Mesh. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to focus a little bit on Dremio just because I'm a little bit more of an expert on the feature set in Dremio. But either way, the idea is that you want to unify data sets, so across your different sources. Okay. Bottom line is, because one, you can, well, the point I want to say here is that specifically, like Dremio has this extra benefit that has like a built-in semantic layer, so you can actually do a lot of the modeling right there, right in Dremio, and basically build. Usually, what you would do is you get like a separate thing, like an at scale or a cube, that acts as your semantic layer. There, you kind of have it built in, and there you would manage all your views to kind of design your modeling to deliver to your BI tools. Okay, and then Dremio has another feature called reflections. This is actually pretty exciting. Anyone, raise your hand if you've ever heard of reflections. Okay, good. I get to talk about something people haven't heard about. This is fun. Okay, so, well, first off, how many people here have heard of Apache Iceberg before today? Oh, okay. Okay. The bottom line is, again, Apache Iceberg is essentially you have your data files, your Parquet, and then you have your metadata files that give you all sorts of information about the data set. Okay, and basically, when you really think about it, it's kind of like having your data files with like an index attached, in a sense. So one of the features that Dremio has is this feature called reflections, where it allows you to use kind of like materialized views. So if you ever use materialized views in pretty much any other data platform, what do? You're creating a copy of some view you have in your database or your data warehouse. Except it's not logical, it's a physical copy. The only problem is, one, you've created a new name. So now instead of querying like sales, you're querying sales materialized. And now you have to make sure that all your analysts update their queries to go query sales materialized. But with reflections, what happens is it creates an Apache Iceberg table. So basically, let's say it's a Postgres table under the hood, and you created a view on a Postgres table, you could turn on a reflection and it creates an Apache Iceberg version of that view on your data lake. Your users just keep querying the Postgres table, like it's the Postgres table. But what happens under the hood is that when Dremio sees the query comes in, it knows that this reflection exists, and then we'll substitute it and say, you know what, let's not use the Postgres table, let's not push down the query, let's go just grab that Iceberg table. So then you get the benefit of Iceberg, which is essentially you get this very fast physical representation, the Parquet files, and you get this index, the metadata, giving you sort of like almost like materialized view on steroids. I like to think about it. So that's a really cool feature. Okay, that guy already kind of made that point. Okay, and then finally, basically, once you've kind of got all these pieces together, so just to kind of recap, I've established that I need to use Iceberg, or I want an Iceberg platform. I've gone and I've interviewed all the people in my company who are going to care about this platform. I've determined that I have a set of requirements that I need to meet, that this platform has to meet. I've gone and I've taken a look at my options for storage. I've taken a look at my options for ingestion. I've taken a look at my options for catalog. I've taken a look at my options for federation, and I've made some selections. And last, we just need to figure out, hey, how are my end users, my data analysts, going to go use it with BI tools and so forth? Okay, so we're taking about like data science, you might want like some sort of notebook platform, BI tools, etc. Okay, and then you just go and implement it. Okay, but again, this doesn't happen overnight. So you've now decided what are the components you want to implement. How do I go about this? So typically, the first step would be to connect your federation tool, again, Dremio or one of the other options. You could connect it to your existing data sources. Okay, so basically, imagine this: I have a bunch of Postgres tables or tables in Postgres. I have a Snowflake data warehouse. So what I do is I connect that to my federation tool, and now I can see all those tables in one place. I can join them. I can create my semantic layer. So I either have a built-in semantic layer if I'm using Dremio, or I get maybe at scale or cube if I'm using something else. And now I can curate all these views and curate my model on top of that. Okay, and basically what I will then do is I can begin moving data to Iceberg. But because I have a semantic layer, instead of having to rebuild all my workflows, as I move one data set over to Iceberg, I just go back to my semantic layer, update this like my bottom layer of views. Like let's say I just have like basically some select star views at the bottom of my semantic modeling, I would just update it to say, instead of select star from Postgres.sales, they'll say like update to select star from Iceberg.sales. And technically, all the views built on top of it just adjust appropriately, and now you don't have to really, the people who built their BI dashboard, still working just the same as it was before, except now it's working off the Iceberg data set. Their AI training is working off the same, just the same. No one has to change anything, and that's the beauty of kind of setting it up this way and having this like migration pattern. Okay, and then you basically slowly move your data sets over until you are move every data set you plan to move over. Again, not every data set's probably going to make it, but as many data sets as you plan to move over to Iceberg. Okay, now these are all links to tutorials that I've written where you can actually build a lakehouse on your laptop. So you can actually see all these components: storage, catalog, ingestion engine, all of this running on your laptop. And this works on a pretty, like 8 gig RAM laptop, you should be fine. And you can actually go through a whole end-to-end lakehouse exercise. So the first one is just like you set up the lakehouse and you run a few queries, and you can see like the files in your like min.io storage. But if you do these 3 other exercises, you actually go through the whole process. Like you'll start with Postgres, you'll actually ingest data from Postgres into Iceberg, then you will then build a dashboard off of it. So you actually see the whole end-to-end process. If anyone wants to see like the whole thing end-to-end on their laptop on working with Iceberg and see what the end feels like. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation on architecting. And again, this story, this whole architecting story, is going to get much fleshed out, much more deeper in that book, Architecting an Iceberg Lakehouse. But that's kind of the narrative. In the book, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend each of those 5 components. I'm going to go in there, like talk about the difference between like S3, Azure, ADLS, min.io, NetApp, Pure Storage, whatnot. Talk about and go through each of those categories and go through all the different options and help. So that way, literally, you can read one book and kind of know what the whole ecosystem is there for you as you build out a platform. But I'm 3 chapters in so far. I got a lot of books to write. But with that, how much time we got left? I got no time left. So I'm going to say thank you. Again, if you have any questions for me, at the last half hour, there'll be more networking, and you can come ask me any questions you like. If you haven't added me on LinkedIn, please do. Again, I'll be posting those links for those books all the time on there, and posting all sorts of other really cool resources. And if you already follow me on LinkedIn, you know exactly what I mean. I post a lot. And if you're here because I messaged you on LinkedIn, then you must be connected to me already. But with that, thank you so much. Have a great day. And I will pass it off to Andy, who will present next.